Hey guys, so today we're going to be solving quadratic equations using square roots. When we're solving quadratics, we are trying to find the value of x when y equals 0. We will solve using square roots. When we see ax squared plus c equals 0. And the thing to notice here is that there is no bx term. Okay, normally our standard form equation is ax squared plus bx plus c, but in this case there is no bx term. So we have some simple steps to this, and while we go over the steps, we're going to go over an equation. So x squared minus 25 equals 0 is the practice equation we'll use. X squared minus 25 equals 0 is the practice equation we'll use. All right, and our first step is to isolate x squared on one side of the equation. So what that's going to look like over here is us solving for x squared. We're trying to isolate it or get it by itself. I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Negative 25 plus 25 cancels. I bring down the x squared equals 0 plus 25 is 25. So that was step 1. Step number 2 is to take the square root of both sides of the equation. So take the square root of both sides of the equation, and we want to use the positive and negative root. Okay, so when we do that on our problem that we have up here, take the square root of both sides. So we're going to square root both sides of the equation. The square root of x squared is x. And now the square root of 25. We know the square root of 25 being 5 because we know that 5 times 5 equals 25. But it says to use the positive and negative root. That's because negative 5 times negative 5 is also positive 25. So we have to say that this is both positive and negative 5 as our answer. All right, let's try it with another example. So I have 3x squared equals 75. Our first step is to isolate x squared on one side of the equation. So I need to solve this for x squared, which means I need to move the 3 by dividing it on both sides. 3 over 3 cancels. I have x squared equals 75 divided by 3, which is 25. Now we're on step 2. Take the square root of both sides of the equation and use the positive and the negative root. So we'll square root both sides. The square root of x squared is x. And just like the last one, the square root of 25 is both positive and negative 5. Okay, moving on just a little bit. Let's try a question that's going to be just a step above that. Okay, so our next question, we have 2x squared minus 72 equals 0. And we're going to follow those same steps. So step 1 was to isolate x squared on one side. So we need to get x squared by itself here. So we're going to do some solving. I'll start by adding 72 to both sides. Negative 72 plus 72 cancels. I bring down the 2x squared. 0 plus 72 is 72. My last step is to divide both sides by 2. So I get x squared equals 72 divided by 2 is 36. Now that we've isolated x squared onto one side, we will do step number 2, which is take the square root of both sides. So I square root both sides of the equation. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 36 is 6, so we say it's positive and negative 6. So it's like we have two answers. We have positive 6 and we have negative 6. All right, we could have another situation where we have a problem that looks like this. X minus 1 squared equals 25. Okay, and here, so we look at our step 1, isolate x squared on one side of the equation. Okay, but if I look, I have x minus 1 squared. Everything inside the parentheses is going to act as our x. This is already squared, equals 25. So we're actually going to move on to step 2, which is to take the square root. So we take the square root of both sides. X minus 1 squared. The square root of a square is just what's underneath it. So x minus 1 equals, the square root of 25 we said was positive and negative 5. That means we're not quite done here yet because I still have x minus 1. So I'm going to split this up into two equations. X minus 1 equals 5 and x minus 1 equals negative 5. Okay, and now I want to solve it for x. Solve both of these equations for x. So I add 1 to both sides here to get that x will equal 6. And on this side I add 1 to both sides to get that x is going to equal negative 5 plus 1, which is negative 4. So that means our answers are x equals 6 and x equals negative 4. All right, now the last thing I'm going to show you is that we have two special cases. So we have x squared plus 6 equals 6. And if I'm following those same steps we did before, isolate x squared on one side, so I'm trying to get x squared by itself. So I'll subtract 6 to get that x squared equals 6 minus 6 is 0. Number 2, take the square root of both sides. So I square root both sides to get x equals, the square root of 0 is just 0. You can't have a negative 0, so it's just 0. So this means that here I have only one solution. So one of our special cases is having just one solution. Now our other special case, this example is x squared plus 49 equals 0. Step 1 is to isolate x squared. So I'll subtract 49 on both sides. I'll have x squared equals negative 49. Step 2 says to take the square root of both sides. So I square root both sides. This is where I have a problem. The square root of x squared I know is x, but I cannot take the square root of a negative number. So we can't have a negative in a square root. Because of that, we actually have to stop here. So we have no real solution.